The end. Akira, part 2.2. All right, last plot summary ever. I know you're excited. No new characters, surprisingly. So the main thing here, of course, is there's a lot of action going on here. We see it start when Kaneda's plan goes into motion as Tetsuo is spotted on the streets, Kaneda. The biker gangs fight on the public streets while the colonel questions the bartender at Harukiya about Kaneda. Meanwhile, Kay steals a scooter and makes her way towards the pier, just to know how she got there. Yamagata confronts Tetsuo. Kaneda is ready to shoot Tetsuo, but hesitates. Yamagata tries to shoot Tetsuo, but Tetsuo kills him. Kaneda does shoot Tetsuo. He hurts Tetsuo, but he's still up. He throws Kaneda against the wall, and the capsule comes loose. Tetsuo steals the capsule. He takes it and apparently collapses, but gets back up and attempts to kill Kaneda and Kei. And the colonel offers to take Tetsuo in and help him control his power. And that is where this volume ends. So quite the cliffhanger. Oh, what happened here? Let's try to get this to work. Oh, well, I don't know what happened here, but the idea, I'll fix it in post. The idea is here is you see a lot of double panels in this section. You have these two pictures, which is both Kaneda and Tetsuo on their bikes riding to meet each other. Then you have this these matching panels of Yamagata and Tetsuo ready to face off. Oh, and then you have these. This is a really nice visual of the face-off between Tetsuo and Kaneda. And in between, you have this moment which is broken up by Yamagata. Shoot him, Kaneda, shoot him now. So you can really see the ways that he's developing these sort of parallel conflicts with these characters. You get different combinations of characters in these paired panels throughout, right? You have Kaneda and the Colonel here. You have the Colonel and Tetsuo here. And so again, I think what you really see emphasized are these different levels of confrontations and these confrontations between these various characters in different ways. And you can see that through the visual construction of these paired panels. You have the friend versus friend, the young versus old, and all of these different combinations and confrontations occurring. So what we also see here is this sort of escalating action and violence. And I don't know why my panels are doing this. So you can focus here on these two, which is the motorcycle crashing through a diner window. You have this fight between the former clown leader Joker and one of the other gang members. And again, you can notice the use of action lines to really emphasize the movement, which is a standard technique in manga. And you can also see there's this really amazing, especially in this panel here, the sort of amazing texture of these moments where it's very visceral. And so the impact is very visceral, such as this moment where we lead up to Yamagata's death, right? So you have all this escalating action. You lead up to this moment of Yamagata's death through Tetsuo's hands. And you're left with this very stark panel of Kaneda holding his friend. And then we continue to see these increasing waves of physical destruction throughout this moment. You have Tetsuo throwing the forklift, of him collapsing the crane, trying to attack his former friends, as well as this escalation between friends where you have Tetsuo collapsing the warehouse on Kaneda screaming, "Die, die, die," as well as Kaneda's response later when Tetsuo literally comes back from apparent death and he screams, "You couldn't stay dead." And so you can see again that the sort of this confrontation between Kaneda and Tetsuo has reached this peak where they're just trying to kill each other, right? They're not even pretending anymore. It's just them trying to kill each other. So really, you can see in the end of this volume also the culmination of the rising tension throughout the volume between Kaneda and Tetsuo as friends, becoming these becoming rivals, and then finally becoming um, just to the death enemies. So the other question that you realize that arises at the very end is this question of who is Tetsuo, right? In this panel, the colonel basically tells Tetsuo who he is. He's not Tetsuo, he's number 41. And so arguably then what you see here is kind of a metaphor for adolescence, right? It's about Tetsuo coming into his own and discovering the limits of his body and his place in the world. So, I mean, in a way, the sort of metaphor for adolescence feels a little almost too spot on, right? Sort of a body out of control, where you have these changes occurring and you don't understand what these changes are or what they mean. And so that reflects that sort of common understanding or common trope of adolescence. So maybe it's a little too spot on for us to consider, but it definitely is there on some level. And so with panels like these, with moments like these, what you see is this sort of working out of identity within Tetsuo. Okay. And it really is highlighted in the Colonel's offer here at the very end of the volume, right? It's come with me now, accept what you are, number 41. So it's him offering Tetsuo a clear identity. As he frames it, it's framed through this promise of power, right? Just before he says this, he says, who do you think drew that power out of you? Think about how much power you could have if you let us train you. So it's really this idea of this kind of power that he can harness and then wield as number 41, right? And so there is a sort of sense of of him finding out who he is about what he is. And so that I think leads us into the sort of our final summary and understanding of what Akira is all about. In this volume especially, and especially near the end of this, you really see this sort of escalating spiral of destruction and violence. We started with the collapse of the water tower and the aqueduct, and then we moved to this really violent sort of street rumble between the clowns and the rest of the gang, and it all sort of culminates here at the pier, with, I would argue, Yamagata's death, where it kind of shows you like the stakes of this escalating conflict. You also see this generational question of youth culture versus the older generation, something that I pointed out in the previous lecture, where you really see this sort of tension between the older generation characters like Netsu and the Colonel and Ryu versus this younger generation with Kaneda, Kei, and Tetsuo. And I think the thing that underlines it all is this shadowy figure of Akira, right? We never know who Akira is. We don't see him at all in this first volume, but he is spoken of with trepidation and fear by nearly all of the characters. And so what Akira in a lot of ways represents then is this kind of legacy of the atomic bomb. And so the question because the legacy of the atomic bomb, because those opening scenes of the book are of this massive bomb destroying Tokyo, right? Which is, again, it's hard to say no, it's not the bomb. Well, it is clearly a bomb, and it has definite symbolic and image connections with the bomb. And so what this does is it shows you that it begins to inform everything that's underneath this book is this question of the bomb. And so the way to consider this is to also take Akira and to put it into its cultural and time specific framework. which is this is the early 80s. And what you see in the early 80s is you see Japan's rise to a kind of economic dominance. It is Neo Tokyo, it is Tokyo, it is Japan sort of rebuilt from the ashes of the war, exactly like you see happening in Akira. It's happening in real life. It is Japan's economic dominance of the time. And so, really, the question here that's being asked is the same question that's being asked of Tetsuo, right? Where do you go from here? Like, what is your plan for the future? There is this sort of burgeoning power, right? If for Tetsuo, it's psychic power, it's telekinesis. If for Japan, it's economic power. So it's very easy to sort of read this kind of metaphoric understanding of Japan during the time in Tetsuo's own struggle for identity. And so what happens is, as much as you see this growing power, the shadow of the bomb that Japan had to rebuild from continues to loom in the background. It's like they're almost saying, yeah, we can rebuild ourselves, we can have this future dominance, but what does it mean to have this legacy, right? And for Tetsuo, for Akira, that power, that legacy is tied directly to this horrifying traumatic event. And so, what you can say Akira is doing in a lot of ways is, in this futuristic setting, in this manga form, is Japan working out the tensions that underlie its own success at the time. Thomas Lamar writes a really excellent article talking about this kind of capitalistic rebirth of Japan, and how Akira represents those tensions. And I'm sort of cribbing from him, but that's what we do. And so this is a way of understanding the novel in terms of these sort of escalating tensions, these sort of escalating spirals of destruction. Like, as much as Tetsuo is coming into this power, he leaves this sort of paths of destruction behind him. And so what Japan has to do, what Tetsuo has to do, what the characters in the book has to do, is sort of come to grips with the power that Tetsuo represents. Like, what ultimately are they going to do? And that's where you see this question of the generational question play out as well. Like, who is ultimately responsible for controlling or handling this power? And these are very fraught questions, and there is no easy answer to them. And so I think what you see in Akira then is a sort of very messy playing out of these questions, that these characters face, but also that Japan faces within this specific cultural and historical moment. And that's where we end with Akira. So, any questions? Any questions from the crowd? So you can see then that this book pulls in and talks about a lot of things. And in terms of sci-fi, again, it's that sort of use of sci-fi as metaphor, right? As this notion that we can understand what's going on, so because in current society, by using a sci-fi framework to talk about it. I know. I mean, that's the thing, though. I mean, the thing that I try to illustrate with at least these images